Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a narrated video for this drawing of a lonely tree on a rock. And this was done in a combination of graphite and charcoal. I used graphite for the lighter areas and charcoal for the darker ones, naturally. And this is supposed to be a sunset on a mountain. I'll mostly talk about how you can create an illusion of distance and depth in your drawing, but I'll also be talking about some specific things like how to draw rocks, branches, and things like that. So let's have a look. So my initial sketch was done with a graphite pencil, and it's very simple. I just decided to place the tree slightly to the left of the center. And then I used a Staedtler HB graphite pencil to cover most of the sky, and then I blended it with a Q-tip, as you can see. Later I added a little bit more value using 2B, I think, and I left out a small white area which I didn't cover with graphite, slightly to the right of the center, where the sunlight will be coming through. So I gently shaded towards the white space, towards the lighter area, to achieve a gradual soft transition, and the rest of it I blended using my other blending tools, including this large brush, which allows me to soften everything and blend it very nicely. Now, as you can see, I'm moving on to drawing the tree, and the tree has a very interesting, very peculiar shape. I would say it's very old, and I think it's a coniferous tree rather than a deciduous one. I think it's an old pine, and the thing about these pines, when they're really old, they get really unusual shapes. Normally, most of these coniferous trees, they tend to taper. They have this typical conical shape, but when they're really old, you have branches that go all over the place. I'm not really an expert, it's just something I've noticed. So here we're going to have some rocks, and the tree is going to be growing on them, as it were. And like I said, the background was done mostly with a graphite pencil. So that's basically my plan. My idea is to create high contrast between here I started working a little bit on the right, creating an area of darker value, but I didn't really like the fact that it went all the way to the edge, so I decided to keep it like a vignette. I didn't draw all the way to the edge. Anyway, like I said, I'm doing most of the background with graphite pencil, and the reason why I'm doing that is because I want contrast between the object in the foreground and the background. That'll help me create an illusion of distance. And another thing that you need to remember when drawing, for example, hills, which is what I'm doing now, is that because of the atmospheric effect, the further away the objects are, the mountains and the hills, the lighter there will be less contrast, and they will tend to be less defined, with less texture and detail. And the objects in the foreground, such as my tree and the rocks, are going to have a lot more value and a lot more contrast, a lot more detail and texture. So to add a little bit more value to some of these hills in the in the midground, as it were, which are to those hills and mountains which are slightly in front of the others, I'm going to be adding a little bit more charcoal on top of the graphite. Now, normally charcoal doesn't really go well on top of the graphite because graphite is a lubricant, but as long as you use a hard pencil and you don't press too hard and you don't put down too much graphite, you probably won't have much difficulty putting down charcoal over graphite. So when combining charcoal with graphite, I think generally you should try to use very light values of graphite, and you should avoid using softer graphite pencils, and you should definitely avoid pressing hard. But the advantage of using this combination is because graphite allows you to create these very light, smooth areas, while charcoal, when you put it in front, allows you to create areas of really high contrast. And these objects which are drawn in charcoal pencil really stand out. So now I'm going to continue working on the branches, and I want to say a few words about how to draw branches, because there are a couple of things that you need to remember. The general tip when you're drawing branches is to try to kind of allow your pencil to curve its way and to twist it as you draw. That way you produce these irregular, curvy, twisted shapes, or twisted lines rather, which kind of look like branches. And the other thing that you need to remember naturally is that the branches taper as they grow. So you start from a thicker line, and then it becomes thinner and thinner. And now I'm adding a little bit of these clusters of needles on the end of those branches to create a sort of a canopy on my tree. And like I said, the tree has a very unusual shape. That's one of the things that I found interesting. I can't really find my reference photo, honestly. I don't know what I did with it, but I did make some significant changes to it. I simplified certain things and I added some things of my own, so I generally don't stick to the reference photo, especially when I draw landscapes. I also wanted to say a few words about drawing rocks, even though right now, as you can see, I'm focusing on the branches and I'm still working on that. But when you're drawing rocks, there are also a couple of things to remember. You need to create areas of high contrast, because the surfaces, or the parts of the rock which are facing the light source will be a lot lighter, and the parts which are facing away from the light source will usually be a lot darker. So the key to achieving realistic looking rocks is to capture that high contrast and to capture those rough, jagged shapes of rocks. And also you can vary their size and shape and things like that. So here we have these branches which are kind of bending downwards because of their length, and some of them which are shorter, they are kind of growing upwards because they are not as heavy. So you need to incorporate a little bit of physics into your drawings as well. And you can see that I also try to produce a little bit of texture on the tree trunk to imitate the appearance of the tree bark. And also you can see that in addition to the work that I did with a charcoal pencil, I'm also adding in some of these thinner branches using a black colored pencil. I could have done that with a graphite pencil as well, but I wanted thinner, cleaner lines there, so I used a black colored pencil, and most of it was done with a charcoal pencil. The charcoal pencils that I'm using are woodless charcoal pencils. They are Warrison woodless charcoal pencils, and I don't really have any particular reason for using them other than the fact that it's easier to sharpen them. I'm pulling the highlights using a Kohinoor pencil eraser, and to soften everything I'm using brushes. Here at the bottom of the tree, I'm going to create something that looks like rocky terrain, but I'm going to add a little bit of grass here and there. I want I want some grass here as well to make the terrain a little bit more interesting. I don't want it to be all rock. But like I said, this whole thing has to be, this whole part to the left needs to be a lot darker. So one of the things that I like creating, and not just in my landscapes but also my drawings of animals as well, for example, is creating these asymmetrical compositions where I have more stuff on one side and more value on one side and lighter value on the other side. There are ways to balance out that composition, and I think the very fact that you have contrast, that you have an area of darker value and the area of lighter value on the other side, is a sort of a balance. But the other thing to achieve a slightly more balanced composition, as you will see near the end, is by placing your signature in the right place. I made a separate video about that. I talked about signature placement and composition and how you can balance out your composition just by putting down a signature on the other side of the drawing. And now, as you can see, I'm starting to work on some of these hills which are kind of closer to us, and you can see that I'm making them a little bit darker, and that I'm starting to use more and more of my charcoal pencil for this, because like I said, the closer these objects are to us, the more value and the more texture there will be. And you can see that I'm trying to create some suggestions of trees here, like these are wooded hills, and like there are lots of trees on top of them. All of these trees, I'm trying to make them look like coniferous trees, maybe I don't know, fir trees or pine trees. It doesn't really matter, but I want it to look like the hills in front are covered with a thick forest, and the ones in the back we can't really see that because we can't really make out the detail, and they're lighter in value anyway. So I'm just going to make some of these trees darker than the others to make it look like some of them are getting less light, like they're deeper in the shadow, and like some of them stand out, maybe they're getting more light. But that's pretty much it. My vignette is now almost done. I'm just going to sign it here on the right side, and like I said, putting down a signature on the opposite side is often a convenient way of balancing out an asymmetrical composition. So I hope you like this drawing of a lonely tree on a rock. I already did a time lapse for this, and I'm going to put the link in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.